Thumbtack presents the ins and outs of caring for your home. Out: uncertainty, self-doubt, stressing about not knowing where to start. In: plans and guides that make it easy to get home projects done. Out: word art. Sorry, live, laugh lovers. In: knowing what to do, when to do it, and who to hire. Start caring for your home with confidence. Download Thumbtack today.
Welcome to another episode of What's New in History. The future's a mystery, but what's new in history? I have a special guest today, Alex Petkas. He is a writer, entrepreneur, and the host of Cost of Glory, which is a podcast celebrating Western civilization's eminent heroes. He has a PhD in classics from Princeton University, and he transformed from academia to alternative media, where he empowers professionals and entrepreneurs through educational programs and leadership retreats. That would be fun. Alex's mission is to translate profound insights from Greco-Roman leaders and philosophers into actionable wisdom for contemporary achievers, which fosters a deeper appreciation for historical greatness among today's innovators. And wow, that is something important. I think today's people really forgot a lot about that. So let's welcome Alex. And today we're going to kind of talk about, I think a lot of people are concerned, and we're comparing the ending days of the Roman Republic to current events today. So Alex is a PhD in classics, and this is his thing. So let's kick it off with Alex, and welcome Alex, and hello, Alex.
Bernie, great to be here with you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for that intro.
Awesome. So, yeah.
I think this is this question you asked about the fall of the Roman Republic and comparing what we're seeing today with that it's a perennially relevant question for people like you and me living in America. Of a republic, at least from its beginnings, founded kind of in the image of the Roman Republic. It seems like whenever we have a constitutional crisis, whether it's Andrew Jackson or Roosevelt, people are all harking back to the days of the Romans and trying to find parallels and trying to paint their opponents as the bad guys from, whether it's Julius Caesar or the Gracchi or Sulla or Marius, or Nero, as the case may be. So, Rome kind of always haunts the U.S. political consciousness. So it's a nice topic to return to.
Yeah, for sure. So what's your take on it? I guess jump right into it. I feel like when you study the historical cycles, and I've been lately reading, and it's of course been popping up a lot on my YouTube feed, where I can't remember who his name was. He was a historian who says, about empires last about 250 years, 10 generations. And we're at about that here in the U.S.
We just might be due. Yeah. Well, if you look at the Roman Republic, there are several phases. They drive out the kings around 504 BC. Like they had kings, and then they transformed into a republic around then, this kind of axial age that a lot of really interesting things happen in ancient history and ancient thought. And around 250 years after that, they find themselves in this great multi-conflict struggle with Carthage, the Punic Wars, where they're fighting Hannibal, and they're essentially transforming over the course of the 3rd century BC, especially after the Second Punic War, into an empire. The First Punic War is in the 270s, and they get Sicily. They're basically, Sicily is between Rome and Carthage, and they kind of fight over this football that the boot of Italy's kicking, and they get their first overseas province at that point. But then after the Second Punic War with Hannibal, from around 220 to the end of the century, they get large swaths of Spain, southern France, and sections of North Africa. And so suddenly they find themselves this Western Mediterranean empire, and it really transforms the character of Rome in important ways that are kind of relevant for the story of the fall of the Republic. Because uh, soon after they conquer Carthage, well, they don't totally conquer Carthage, but they subdue it, right, and turn it into a sort of vassal state. Um, they conquer Greece through a very complicated process of kind of picking fights with various Hellenistic Greek monarch king types like Antiochus, Perseus, Philip of Macedon, and they end up you know transitioning into this kind of expansionist empire from say the 220s to around the reign of Augustus in from 31 BC to around 15 BC. And so there's you're at your second kind of 200 to 250 year chunk.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we're going to talk about today. And you can kind of keep telling the story about these cycles later in the Roman Empire, which does, of course, last until 1453. But it constantly,
Right.
in order to survive, you have to really transform. And I think that's maybe an interesting lesson for what's going on in the U.S. today. But so I think one of the things that's interesting about the parallels between the U.S. and Rome is they have this great influx of wealth when their empire transforms, and it really changes the character of Rome. You get all this wealth inequality. You get senators buying up public land with the loot that they get from all of these foreign conquests. You get farmers getting dispossessed, these small time, local gentry kind of getting squeezed out by these big Roman fat cats. And yeah, I think you could draw some parallels with the way that wealth after World War II really exploded in America. We had this great, amazing run of, stocks always going up, always going up. Everybody's pension and 401k. If you had savings in a corporate job, it was not that hard to just build a happy, stable family life. And it all sort of seemed to be unwinding around maybe 2008, maybe 2000 with the dot-com crisis. We started to sort of question our own, our like the goodness of empire in the Bush era in the U.S. And I think you can see a lot of parallels in the Roman consciousness where suddenly people, even among the aristocracy, are asking, are all of our conquests really good? Are these really good for Rome? The first people to do that are the Gracchi brothers
Right.
around the 130 BC, 120 BC. Both get murdered.
Yeah. They remind me of they're like Bernie Sanders. I feel like Bernie
Yeah.
Sanders has been like, reincarnated. If the Gracchi brothers through history, like, anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, and the Gracchi are these populists who are interested in land redistribution, but they have this kind of like patriotic appeal, this salt of the earth appeal that I think Bernie still has a lot of that, even though he's probably retiring soon. There's a kind of a gritty, tough guy aspect to the Gracchi brothers as well. Even though they're part of the aristocracy, they know how to talk to the common man. So the figure that I've been most interested in recently with regards to the fall of the Roman Republic is this guy Cato the
Okay.
Younger,
Yeah.
who's a famous Stoic hero. And Cato is kind of at the end of this transition from Republic to fall of the Republic to these great civil wars, and he's best known as the mortal enemy of Julius Caesar. So he's kind of part of the Caesar arc as
Hmm.
well. So maybe we could get deeper into Cato's life
Sure.
himself.
Yeah, for sure. If you would like to, that would be great. I mean, I know we know a lot about him, right? Because
Mhm.
he wrote so much.
Well, Cato himself is Cato the Elder. His great grandfather wrote a lot. We
Okay.
have his De Agricultura, and we have fragments of his history of Rome, the Origenes, and we have fragments of his speeches. But for whatever reason, Cato the Younger, his literary production, his letters don't survive. But we
Oh,
do
okay.
know a ton about him from what other people say about him, because like his grandfather was the guy who's famously like, banging on the desk at the end of every Senate meeting saying Carthage must be destroyed. He's
Right.
trying to provoke the Third Punic War. Cato the Younger sort of modeled himself after that, his great grandfather's sternness and his, old Roman salt of the earth virtue. Interestingly, Cato the Elder, kind of a left-wing figure in
Okay.
contemporary Roman politics. We think of him as this kind of militaristic expansionist,
Yeah.
but he was a kind of an outsider, a farm boy, and he's always provoking the aristocrats, accusing them of getting sloppy with their luxuries. That's
Okay.
actually kind of a left-wing posture in Rome,
Yeah,
which I think is really interesting.
definitely.
Yeah.
I think
So
they're trying to avoid the decadence that comes along with the empire. That's what can't remember the historian's name. I'll try to put in the show notes who said it, but that's what after a certain the generations become decadent.
Applebee's has a brand new Big Easy menu. It features all your Bourbon Street favorites in one new menu. Plus a new Bourbon Street chicken and andouille sausage penne starting at just $11.99. With Cajun flavors sure to get your taste buds dancing. Applebee's is bringing Bourbon Street to your street. Make sure to try the Big Easy menu now. Only at Applebee's. Only at Applebee's.
Limited time price, participation, and selection may vary.
Thumbtack presents the ins and outs of caring for your home. Out. Uncertainty, self-doubt, stressing about not knowing where to start. In. Plans and guides that make it easy to get home projects done. Out. Word art. Sorry, live, laugh lovers. In. Knowing what to do, when to do it, and who to hire. Start caring for your home with confidence. Download Thumbtack today.
Running an online business requires passion, knowledge, and a lot of dedication. Adding the complexities of setting up and managing hosting for your website piles on more work when you already have so many plates spinning. Whether you manage one WordPress website or dozens, Kinsta's managed solutions give you access to a platform that's optimized for the fastest speed, has enterprise-grade security features, and is powered by an intuitive custom dashboard with everything you need to manage your sites efficiently. Plus, Kinsta provides human-only WordPress expert support, which is available 24/7, 365 to assist with even the most complex sites. Forget frustrating AI chatbots. Kinsta gives you complete peace of mind by ensuring that your WordPress sites are always online, secure, and performing at their best. Start your journey with Kinsta today and get your first month free. Don't have time to migrate your site? Kinsta takes care of everything for you. Learn more at kinsta.com/podcast. That's KINSTA.com/podcast.
yeah, exactly. That's Sallust, among many of the Roman moralists kind of following Sallust. I think Sallust is one of the first Roman historians to really put his finger on this problem of luxury and decadence. And Sallust is a very interesting source for Cato the Younger himself, actually. So Sallust is a great book to read if you want to get into the fall of the Roman Republic. Well, he wrote several books, but the best one I think that people could read would be Sallust's War with Catiline. It's available in Oxford World Classics or Penguin. And Sallust is a contemporary of Julius Caesar. He's like a junior officer in the army of Julius Caesar. And so, long story short, the Roman Republic kind of breaks up in three phases. One is the first civil war between Sulla and Marius. Sulla's a conservative optimist, kind of aristocrat. Marius is this kind of populist general outsider. And they clash, and it's incredibly bloody. Hundreds of thousands of people die. Julius Caesar's a teenager at the time, and so is Cato. They're not old enough to fight, not old enough to get executed either.
Yeah, yeah.
To their
Right.
great fortune. But they grow up, and Cicero, another great figure, is or sort of this generation. They all grow up in the shadow of the great Roman Civil War, the first Civil War, when first the spears of Romulus were turned against the sons of Romulus. So Sallust is not probably alive at that point, but it's the second Civil War that he kind of um, he kind of writes under the shadow of it. He doesn't actually directly address it, but he there's a kind of mini episode that happens in 63 BC, a kind of flare up, pre-taste of what's coming, maybe when this aristocrat Catiline tries, who's sort of in a lot of debt and not having a lot of success in Roman politics. He tries to start a rebellion and overthrow the state.
Oh,
and that's the first clash between, yeah, yeah. Well, and
sounds like an echo.
He's drawing a
Sorry.
lot of discontent, like the people are upset at the wealth inequality, and the nobility is not solving the problems that need to be solved. And so whenever that kind of thing happens, as we've seen lately, it's like a political tinderbox. If you can find somebody who can really speak to the frustrations and the resentments of the masses, then that's electrifying. And Catiline was decent at that. He was decent enough at that. But he had other sort of character flaws that made him not a great leader to really start that rebellion. And he plotted against the state, and because he couldn't keep his mouth shut, and he was kind of corrupt. He eventually got found out, and his plot was uncovered. And this is where Julius Caesar and Cato first kind of clash over the trial of what to do with the conspirators. Caesar is for showing them mercy, and Cato is for extreme punishment, the death penalty for all the conspirators. So, like, famous episode in Roman history.
It just does seem like, I'm sorry to be, it just seems like it does seem like an echo of our time, and almost though like our time is more compressed. Like that's happened. You have the Gracchi brothers, and then you have who you just talked about in this, these in the 60s, but it doesn't all happen later until the 40s. I feel like
Right.
maybe we're either compressing it now, or I don't know. Like I keep thinking, like, what's the next generation that's been raised under this going to be like? I guess I never felt older until just recently, when things have changed so much. And I just
Yeah.
imagine, somebody that was maybe 5 years old 10 years ago, and they're 15, and then they're going to be in their 20s, and it kind of reminds me of Julius Caesar. And what's the next thing?
Yeah, it's like, we think of technological change. Usually we talk about the speed of change in the technological world, microchips getting faster, the airplane. I mean, a lot happened in the 20th century, right? But it seems like a whole heck of a lot has happened in the last 20 years. And why wouldn't we expect political change to start accelerating too?
Right. Right. If the
Um,
technology makes the communication faster. I mean, look at you and I, and it's recording
yeah.
this we're far apart from each other, and we could put this out, and we're putting out normal things. We're not putting out conspiracies or anything, but conspiracies now have a way to fly around pretty quick.
Oh yeah, yeah, and conspiracy is almost like a viral marketing mechanism. It's like, oh, you can hear the secrets right here. It's like it incentivizes the most salacious stories to
Right.
circulate and get stuck in people's heads. Um, yeah, but I think that is very. If that's right, then maybe we should be stocking up on non-perishables because because Roma's in for a lot of trouble um, if the change is accelerating this fast. But um, and I also find that the way that the Romans use media technology is really fascinating. So Julius Caesar, he's often campaigning in Gaul. Well, let me get to this thread of the story,
Yeah, sure.
which we're
Sorry.
kind of summarizing in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So Cato and Caesar clash over the fate of the Catilinarian conspirators. Cato ends up winning the argument, and the Senate executes the conspirators. But Julius Caesar, who's an aristocrat himself, but kind of in the Gracchi mold, he knows how to speak to the people. Julius Caesar very cleverly, by defending the Catilinarian conspirators, who were very popular with the disaffected masses, even though he lost the argument, he kind of became their champion. And this is like a really important moment in Caesar's career. He's young. He hasn't been on his famous Gallic War campaigns, which is kind of what made him into the great conqueror that he became. So fast forwarding a little bit, he goes to gets himself elected consul in 59, and he manages to get himself assigned the command of Gaul, which is just a sliver along the coast, really, at that point in Roman history. That Gaul is unconquered. We're talking about France and Belgium, basically today. And so you've got these tribal confederacies that run the show there, the Aedui, the Sequani, and Caesar just there along the coast, and he starts picking fights first with the Helvetii, and eventually I won't go through the whole narrative, but he ends up conquering all of France and Belgium over the course of the 50s BC. But the way that he does it, I think, or the way that he's not in Rome this entire time from 59, well, from the beginning of 58 BC all the way until 49 BC, he does not enter the city of Rome. He does not even enter Italy. He's off in his province, because if he returns, he will be subject to prosecution. He'll have to lay down his authority. He'll be vulnerable. And so he just keeps on fighting, keeps on picking fights and racking up victories while the pot is boiling at home. But one of the ways that he builds political support while he's away is he writes these Gallic war commentaries that we now recognize as Caesar's classic of military history. They're war reports.
Yeah, I read them as a kid, actually. They were very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating, hijinks and, schemes of these plotting Gauls. And Caesar is such a good storyteller, right? Like I did a whole series on Caesar's Gallic Wars on my podcast. And I just did a deep dive, and he's so clever with how he frames narratives. You can see he's just one of his superpowers was not just being an amazing general, but being an amazing communicator. And for me, as a student of ancient writers and ancient writing, like I said, I'm very interested in this media technology. He uses his Gallic war commentaries as these kind of missives that he sends back to be read aloud in the Senate every year, to be read aloud in the forum for anybody who'd like to hear. And he kind of he's got letters flowing in from his own desk and from his friends, and everybody's always talking about what Caesar's doing in Gaul, and Caesar makes very sure to shape the narrative in the right way. And so I think that's like one of the things that really made Caesar who he was, that power of communication.
It's so funny, like how we talked about the technology compressing, and the time, like if that was now, we could just pick him up in Gaul and just that would be the end of him.
Yeah.
But he was able to hang out there for 10 years and put it out. And in 10 years, we'd be bored with it.
Right.
So that's why it does feel like it's like, you can't say it's exactly the same thing and the same thing's going to happen. It just keeps seeming to me like all those things that happen are going to happen all really quick, maybe.
Yeah. You gotta keep people's attention. So it's another reason to speed up the process.
And I know it's a little tangent, but I'm curious. But and if was there conspiracy theories in those days too? But
totally. I mean, here's a really interesting one. Cicero is the great orator, famous, golden tongue orator, politician at Rome. Cicero is the guy who was consul at the time that the Catilinarian conspiracy was unearthed, and that ended up being like pretty demonstrably true. They got these guys to confess. They were planning to set fire to the city, to murder a bunch of prominent senators, do a debt cancellation, and Cicero found out about it, and he brought the evidence to the Senate, and they were arrested, and blah blah blah. But Cicero said much later that he had evidence that the richest man in Rome, Crassus, was behind it all. And the whispers at the time in the trial in the Senate of the conspirators, somebody says Crassus is guilty too, and all of this whole block of senators that are kind of beholden to Crassus. They owe him money. He's got this really amazing political machine. This senator who kind of brought up Crassus's name gets shouted down. But Cicero later, much later after Crassus was dead, he said he had evidence that Crassus was in on it. So it was like made to seem like this populist conspiracy. Catiline kind of became the fall guy, but maybe there were more powers involved, including not just Crassus, but Julius Caesar himself. And this is one of the reasons why I think Cato just became his determined sworn enemy, because Cato knew, or at least believed, this story. And maybe he had incontrovertible evidence that Cicero, maybe he saw the evidence that Cicero later talks about, that Julius Caesar was involved in this plot to overthrow the state. So from then on, it's not until 49 BC that Caesar crosses the Rubicon and the great crisis that ends up, plunging the world and the Roman world into war again. But all throughout Cato's career, Cato's, about the same age as Caesar, Cato is just sworn to stop Caesar at all costs. Cato, of course, is the famous hero of the Stoics. He's a Stoic philosopher, or at least he listens to Stoics, and he walks around barefoot. He preaches, or at least he kind of lives by this model of intolerance to pain, or extreme tolerance for pain, rather, invulnerability to pain, and justice, whatever the cost, avoiding luxury, focusing only on what you can control. There's a lot of great Stoic maxims that Cato lived by, but one of them was, if that a Stoic, that a good man, according to the Stoics, should be involved in politics. This was debated to some extent among philosophers. Should a good man be involved in politics? It necessarily involves getting in dirty business. Mm-hmm. And Cato said, well, it doesn't involve getting into dirty business, but you just have to live an extremely irregular life. Like, you can't be like the other politicians. And so Cato was just conspicuous for this very otherworldly life that he lived. He was a radical critic of bribery. Bribery was rampant in the late Roman Republic. Electoral bribery, especially bribery to get acquitted of political crimes and political trials. And there was a lot of corruption in the late Roman Republic.
We hear a lot of these, Pardons, sorry.
It rhymes, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting conspiracy, this idea that, Caesar might have been involved in it. And I think this motivated Cato to say, at all costs, Caesar must be stopped, because we know what he was capable of. He was willing to burn down Rome, to overthrow this, to have senators murdered, just so that he could be on top of the pyramid someday. Yeah. I think you kind of have to understand that, to understand why these two men eventually clashed and brought about the transition that we're talking about from republic to autocracy.
Kind of a specific question, and maybe it's a little off track, but do you think that, do you think he always wanted to just end the republic? Or I remember that one of the things was that by this point, if you were consul, after you're done being consul, they prosecuted you.
Yeah.
And then so it was almost like, why would you want to do that? So Caesar, instead of being prosecuted, just said, well, I'm going to be consul forever. So
yeah,
that's that. But maybe he didn't want to do that, but he had to do that. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Thumbtack presents the ins and outs of caring for your home. Out. Uncertainty, self-doubt, stressing about not knowing where to start. In. Plans and guides that make it easy to get home projects done. Out. Word art. Sorry, live, laugh lovers. In. Knowing what to do, when to do it, and who to hire. Start caring for your home with confidence. Download Thumbtack today.
Work takes up most of your time. That's why you should use Stamps.com to save time with your mailing and shipping, and have flexibility to focus on more important things. Stamps.com can handle all your mailing and shipping needs with rates up to 88% off USPS and UPS. Add flexibility to your day with Stamps.com. Go to Stamps.com/program to sign up for a special offer. No contract, cancel anytime. That's Stance.com/program.
Yeah, I think that Caesar was kind of the old mold of Roman politician in a lot of ways for most of his career. He just wants to be the first man in the Republic. You know, if you look at the career of Pompey the Great, was Caesar's friend and then kind of frenemy, and Cato ends up provoking Pompey, who's really the big man in Rome, to kind of take a hard line with Caesar, even though they'd been, connected by marriage. Caesar's daughter marries Pompey. I did a whole series on Pompey as well. But if you look at who the guy that these people are trying to be like, that Pompey and Caesar are like looking to as the greatest man in Rome, it was Sulla. Maybe it was Marius, but probably it was Sulla. Sulla ended up winning the Civil War. I did a whole Cost of Glory series on Sulla and Marius too.
We'll put all the links in here for the
It's
show
epic.
notes for sure.
I mean, it's such an epic story. I mean, you gotta read the story somehow. I based all of what I do on Plutarch's biographies.
Okay.
They're kind of my main source, and that's a great place to start if you want to read something about this. Plutarch's life of Sulla, his life of Marius, his life of Pompey and Caesar. But they're trying to be like Sulla or Marius, and that these men were just kind of took turns being the greatest man of Rome.
I see.
The Republic still functions. Marius was consul 7 times. That's irregular, but he was still a consul, not a dictator.
Mm-hmm.
Sulla becomes dictator after he wins the Civil War, but amazingly, he puts the office down. Dictator is just a Roman kind of military martial law office that's supposed to be temporary. And even though Sulla didn't have to lay it down, he had nobody alive at that point. He had executed all of his enemies. He didn't have to lay down the office of dictator, but he did. And so I think that goes to show, like, Sulla didn't want to change Rome into a monarchy. It's like it wouldn't be Rome anymore. And I think that you could probably say the same actually about Julius Caesar. Until the very end, I think he starts to maybe wonder, maybe there's a different destiny for Rome. But by that time, it's not too long after he wins the Second Civil War that he's assassinated. So he didn't really.
Right.
We don't
that
really get
didn't
to
really
see
end it
where his
either.
thought
People
was
think,
going.
well, if a certain person dies, that'll end everything. But that's not really how it works.
Yeah. No. It isn't indeed. Well, and if you look at the way, so you talked about consuls getting prosecuted. I think you can see the place to look for, what was Caesar really thinking, probably is this clash that happens in 49 when he crosses the Rubicon. So he's coming back from Gaul. He wants the Senate. I mean, this is a long story, of course, but he wants the Senate to make an exception for him, to allow him to run for consul in absentia. He's a proconsul, which means he has legal immunity. He's got his armies with him in Gaul. He's got 10 legions. But he wants essentially to be able to reintegrate himself into civilian life, but with enough of a kind of constitutional immunity to at least kind of get his bearings and make his appeals to the people and do his politicking before his enemies just prosecute his brains out in court and run him out of town. So he just wants a year of consular immunity. And at first, Pompey grants this. Pompey is the most powerful man in Rome at the time. He gets some friends to pass a law. Yes, Caesar can have an exception. But then he goes back on his word because he got pressured by Cato. And Cato and his friends are the kind of hardliner party. Caesar must be stopped at all costs. Caesar cannot be allowed to avoid prosecution. It would be a constitutional crisis for Caesar to return home without, so they're kind of doing the lawfare thing, you might say. That's certainly what Caesar's friends were saying in Rome. Like, these people are using the courts and the kind of the constitution for a personal vendetta. And Caesar, eventually they kind of send ultimatums back and forth. And Cato all along, I think he thought Caesar would back down. I think he thought if Caesar is faced with the choice of declaring an open war on Rome or submitting, I think Caesar would not do it. That's what Cato thought, but he underestimated Caesar.
Mm-hmm.
And so Caesar crosses the Rubicon, which symbolically is the border between his province and Italy, and he crosses it with an army. It's tantamount to declaring war, although arguably the Senate had already declared war on him by declaring him a public enemy. So he could make the case that he was just defending himself.
Right.
But he didn't want to seize power. He was forced to seize power. That would be his story.
Everything just sort of like happened beyond everybody's control then, just like most things do, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just once things get set in motion, there's things you can't change. I mean, he could have ran, but of course he wanted to be a great man. It seems like that's a lot different than when we make comparisons that people do want to be great people, but that seems a little different, the Roman attitude towards that. Do you think? I don't know.
Yeah. I think they have a lot less hang-ups about just the kind of unquestioning pursuit of honor. Machiavelli talks about this. He says Christianity, for all that it's true and good, it's kind of softened us, and we've lost that public spirit of honor that he thought we should bring back. But because it was so embodied by the Romans that the thing most worth living for, the thing most worth fighting and dying for, is honor. What is honor? Is it fame? Well, I think it's best kind of captured by the Greek word for honor, which is time, which is also the word for price. Your honor is like your price. Your how much you would be ransomed for.
Okay.
If you were captured in war, there's like it's kind of quantifiable in the Greek mind, at least.
I was thinking the other word, kleos, that they say, but that's a different. That's glory. So then the other is honor.
Yeah, that's
two
fame.
Different things.
Mm-hmm.
So kleos is fame, and the other is honor.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I think a lot of people today are looking more for fame. I feel like our media is so fake in some ways, where one person could go from one side to the other, where they're just basically actors. One day I'm passionate about this, or maybe you could say lawyers. I don't know, more like actors. I'm passionate about this, and I will argue it, with a passion. And then next month I'll go somewhere else and argue with another passion.
Yeah, they're just kind of hired guns. Yeah,
which has always been a thing in history. Which is, I think, kind of what you do, right? You talk about how we kind of lost teaching the classics, and we miss all this, and it's still real appropriate today to have this base, and because these people were kind of working this stuff out, wrote it all down, and we don't really need to re-find it. It's right there.
Yeah, I think that we have lost the culture of honor, and it has a lot of ramifications. I mean, you look at the way that how eager we are to tear down statues of whoever it be that we sort of has fallen out of favor publicly. It's almost like we forgot, if you undermine the honor economy of a state, if you can't kind of reliably say this person has served the state and deserves to be honored, their memory deserves to live on as somebody honorable. Now that there's always kind of a flexibility there, like one generation's hero is another generation's villain, but too much of that, people start to forget what honor even is, because honor is something that's conferred by the political community. For the Greeks and the Romans, it's something that you should strive for. It's the greatest thing that the state can offer the people who serve it, and that's the way that the classical mind thinks about it. And I think that we've lost that culture of honor in a large part because we have lost the classics in our education system. I think that they didn't just fall. I think they were pushed.
I don't want to lose your train, because I just want to give a little pushback, just so I don't I think that tearing down a statue of George Washington, maybe
Yeah.
because he owned slaves, would be wrong. But I'm not so sure that like Robert E. Lee is someone we should be honoring. That's my opinion, and your other people's opinion could be different, and we're not a political channel. But an actual rebel to the country is a hero to the rebels, in my opinion. I'll just leave it at that.
No, I think that's fair because, well, and even the Romans, like, Sulla had the statues of Marius ripped down
Yeah,
and thrown
sure.
into the
Dug up his
Tiber.
bones, I think, too, didn't he? And throw them
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
Tiber.
yeah. He did. He did. So, I think that there and a lot of those Confederate monuments were put up like much later, right? Like in the
Right, kind of as
early 20th
oppression
century.
to oppress
Yeah.
the people they were trying to show, like, So
Yeah.
I think that's where, and then I feel
But
like,
it's like Abraham Lincoln and George
Yeah,
Washington and
we don't need to
Jefferson. I
tear
mean,
those
like,
statues down.
like there's
I
got
don't
to be
think-
a line,
Of course, everything there has to be a line, but it's hard to make lines. But
Yeah.
I think that's where, though, I feel that that's where we're stoking fires, where we'll say, someone's not, because we have so much media, so much information, and people really are just playing on their phones. I mean, let's be honest. I was just on planes. They're playing games and they're just entertaining themselves to death.
Yeah.
I'm reading Herodotus, and I'm reading about the Persian Wars, and and they're playing on their phones. So to try to explain and then just watch a quick news clip to say they're tearing down all the statues, they want to tear down George Washington because they're tearing down Robert E. Lee. That's dishonest. And it's
Yeah.
hard for people to get all the details, and it is frustrating for educated people. I shouldn't say that. I don't mean people aren't educated in general, but that don't know about these classics and these sweeps of history, how things happen and how people manipulate opinion. Then they just form a quick opinion, and so
Yeah.
I think you're right, as to learn to I don't know how we can get back to our attention spans, because I feel our attention spans are the problem. I'm talking to you. You have a shelf of books behind you, and I
Yeah.
bet you read most of those. You've probably looked at a lot of them, and I feel today we have so much information that's really just nonsense. I mean, it's worthless in a way.
There was a book a number of years ago. Gosh, what is it called? It's that kind of talks about how the book itself as a technology sort of trains your brain for longer spans of attention.
Really? I'd like to know about that.
Yeah, yeah. God, it's famous. I'm embarrassed. I can't remember the title.
That's
but,
okay. We'll find it. I'll look it up. We'll find
Yeah, well, it's essentially like the way your media consumption patterns really do shape your ability to pay attention profoundly. And
Absolutely.
and I think that one strategy for fighting back against, I mean, I'm on Twitter. Okay, I'm guilty of this a lot, but I'll try to fast from it now and then. But one thing that you can definitely do to train yourself to think deeper and not jump to conclusions. It's just like reading a physical book, especially where
Absolutely.
where your digital distraction. I mean,
Yes.
it's nice to read articles online, but it's not just reading as such. It's like reading in a way that's not tempting, and there's like a kind of physical interaction with the
Yeah, just read a
page.
novel. I did it
Yeah.
myself, and I actually have ADHD, but I struggle with it my
Yeah,
whole life.
same.
And but I will, like, when we were young, we were able to read novels, and it felt like it was getting harder. So I will have forced myself to read. And it's not a force. Once you start reading it, you're like, yeah, I'd rather read this novel. And I would say that
Right.
to anybody listening. And I think this is kind of what you do too, to try to help people, is like, just don't, if you can't read the classics, you don't have to go, right away, but just read a novel, read a magazine article or something, like try
Yeah.
to read something for 20 minutes, like start slow and then get to be able to actually read something. And then you may be able to read, Herodotus, but just do, read a novel or something instead of just, 5-second bits of information that says those guys are terrible.
Yeah, yeah, and it really does take long to understand a complex political situation. And if you think it's hard to understand Roman history and you think it's easy to understand American politics, boy,
Yeah.
we have a much more complicated political system, and
Indeed.
that requires much more nuance to really understand what's going on.
Indeed.
So, yeah, well, I mean, to close out the Caesar loop, Caesar crosses the Rubicon, and they fight this great civil war. he loses the battle of Dyrrhachium, the first battle that goes to Pompey, but then after that they fight the battle of Pharsalus in Greece, and Caesar just decisively defeats Pompey. And there's many years actually of mopping up that he has to do, including Cato the Younger retreats to Africa with some of the remnants of the what are called the Republican armies, the senatorial armies, as opposed to the Caesarian faction armies. And they end up Caesar ends up winning a great battle against Cato's friend Scipio Metellus in Africa. And once Cato gets the news, he commits suicide famously. Yeah, he says he famously doesn't want to live under the mercy of Caesar. He doesn't want to give Caesar. And Caesar says when he hears of Cato's suicide, Cato, you deprive me of the honor of showing you clemency.
I figured you were going to say that because I forgot, but I know Caesar he was into the clemency.
Yeah. Famously against the example of Sulla. He's kind of the anti-Sulla in a lot of ways. Sulla was famously, vengeful on his enemies, proscribed and executed thousands of men after he won the Civil War.
Wow.
Caesar said, we're not going to do that. And of course, came back to bite him, you might say, because many the assassins that ended up killing him a couple of years later in the Senate House were included many of the men that he spared,
right,
who were his former enemies. So,
well, I have a question then too. What do you think? So Caesar basically won by military power. Do you think he won by military power, or did he win on the battle of ideas?
A little bit of both. He had to rule by consent, like any monarch, I think. And one of the things that he would do to sort of demoralize his enemies is he captured and cornered some Republican forces in Spain early on in the war, and he spared the generals and let them return to Pompey to go fight him in another battle. And I think that kind of poisoned the resistance,
I see.
It kind of once the army at Pharsalus was defeated, the Republican forces, a lot of these soldiers don't care that much about who they're fighting for.
Right.
A lot of them have never seen Rome, honestly.
Yeah.
And so they hear that Caesar is merciful and he's the winner. And, men just flood over to his side once he wins a quick battle. And the Republican generals did the opposite, kind of foolishly. They execute after the first battle of Dyrrhachium, a lot of Caesar's soldiers that had been fighting for him. They execute like hundreds of men. And so, it just hardens Caesar's forces against them. I mean, so he's a master of persuasion. I think ideologically, it's hard to say that Caesar does begin to entertain thoughts that maybe he's greater than just a man. He spent during the Civil War, he spent some time in Egypt with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, and he's around a lot of these Eastern dynasts, these monarchs who are divinely appointed, maybe. And he starts to think maybe that's what Rome needs.
Maybe they do have a destiny. Everybody seems to get that with everything seems to go right for you. You just sort of feel like you must have it from the first Chinese emperor to Caesar to everybody. They just must have a destiny that because it's all working, and then I must be right. That's so interesting. I feel like oh, sorry. No, you go.
Well, I was just going to say that I think that the smartest thing Caesar ever did of a brilliant career of military and political victories, the smartest thing he ever did to secure his legacy, at least from his perspective, would be to appoint Octavian as his nephew. This guy who was arguably like a better politician even than Caesar himself. Not as great of a military commander,
right?
But one of the first things that Octavian does, he's like 19 years old, is he declares his adoptive father to have been a god. He's kind of taking the lead from Caesar on that. Like Caesar kind of laid the ground. He never said I'm a god, but sometimes he sort of hinted that he wasn't so opposed to being considered as such. Um, so I think Octavian sort of took the lead there. And if he's the son of a god, then who knows, right? Um,
Right. It's funny what people believe, right? Probably like a lot of the smarter people, like no one's going to believe that. He's going to say he's a god, but son of a gun if they don't.
yeah. Right.
I think I feel like we've been talking for like an hour and we just kind of scratched the surface. So a couple of things.
Yeah.
If you would come back, I think we could talk again because you have so many other things to talk about. And I
Love to.
also think that like you can't answer the question, is it the same? Is it different? There's so many. It's like any other question. It's complicated and I think we're living in interesting times though compared to those times. I mean,
Yeah.
if in the 1950s it wasn't, like this in the 1930s, everything had different things happening, but this is a real pivotal. I cannot say that. Pivotal,
Pivotal and pivotable.
pivotal. So time,
Yeah.
definitely a pivotal. Oh my goodness,
I
time.
think, people were talking about the end of history for a while,
Oh
right?
yeah, I
Francis
remember that.
Fukuyama, and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
so much for
I
that
remember I was
theory,
I was like, that's silly. I remember I was young. I was like, come on.
right? Yeah. No, I'd love to come back, and I think that the Roman Republic is endlessly fascinating. I know you guys have been going through plowing your way gradually up to 500 BC, and
Yeah.
as soon as I finish this series that I'm working on Caesar, I'm going to go back to the Persian Wars and
Okay.
because there's a lot of great Plutarch biographies on Cimon and Aristides and Solon before that. So
Yeah.
lot of great biographies to hit from around that period. And Herodotus was just one of my first loves as a classicist.
Yeah.
He's such a great storyteller.
I really need to read those other ones too, though, because he is such a storyteller and he definitely had his own axe to grind and he was trying to
Yeah,
entertain as well.
yeah,
So entertaining.
absolutely.
That's a great one for people to get started with, I think, is Herodotus. Even,
Hmm.
try to read a little bit of Herodotus, try to read some of the classics. I guess the last thing, well, you know what? Let's leave it as a cliffhanger because we should come back, I think, and talk about, how the classics, are important. Like the classics, why is it important for today and which ones you could talk. We didn't even get the chance to talk about your favorite person to do biographies on and that kind of thing.
Well, that's a whole nother hour
Yeah,
easily.
exactly. But I love it. So, if you're game, I think the listeners will be game. Leave us your comments, even though it's not a YouTube channel, but you could leave comments on Spotify, but nobody
Yes,
nobody does. Even on other.
I've started getting my first comments actually
Yeah.
recently. Yeah, they just opened them up. It's great encouragement. So if you're listening on Spotify, go leave a comment
Yeah,
on this
leave comments
episode. We
on
love
there.
to hear about them. Yeah.
Definitely, because I once in a while I get emails from people and they'll talk but I would love to have comments. I mean, please nothing about aliens or anything like that, but right? But comments would be great. So, and I'm going to put all his information in the show notes and some of the things we talked about. When I go through and edit it, I'll write notes to myself so I could put links in there because I do like to have links for the people to read. And I mean, this was really great. I really appreciate. Did you want to add anything else? I'm sorry if I
No, get
ended
out there and
abruptly.
read some history and pay attention to what's going on. You can find me at costofglory.com if you want to find my website, but Cost of Glory is available on all players. And I love talking about these great figures from the past and learning from their lessons and admiring them even when they make mistakes. I think is it's important to have. I think as your listeners know, you can admire somebody but have a balanced perspective on none of these guys are saints.
Yeah,
And
yeah, you should and you could. Absolutely.
mhm.
Well, yeah, let's do it again then. I'm definitely game for that. Let's definitely do another episode and we'll go from there. And if you could leave messages in the comments, let us know what you would like us to talk about. I challenge somebody to leave a message in both of our feeds comments.
Yeah, indeed, indeed.
All
Really
right.
enjoyed it, Bernie.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Talk soon.